When it was released, Twilight was one of the most popular books ever. Exploding in a time when social media wasn't as prevalent, Twilight, like Harry Potter, became a phenomenon. Meyer, despite being a new writer, enthralled readers with her saga. Legions of screaming fans attended events, and furious debates over Team Jacob versus Team Edward exploded. For teens and their moms, Twilight was the book, making even the hits we have now, like Fourth Wing, look small. In many ways, Twilight defined the young adult space as we know it. And in recent years, young adult has given rise to another category, new adult, a category which, while written in a similar style, includes more adult content. Like Stephenie Meyer, Sarah J. Maas began as a young adult writer, with her Throne of Glass series becoming steadily more mature as the series progressed. There have been few books which have reached the same heights as Twilight. Though for those on BookTok, Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses series comes close. Easily the most read series on the platform, ACOTAR has attracted a legion of devoted fans in much the same way Twilight did. Featuring multiple love interests, common romantasy tropes, and troubled love as a focus, ACOTAR has a great deal in common with Twilight. While it's technically a new adult book, we wouldn't have new adult without young adult, and the same ideas draw readers to ACOTAR. Though it's very much its own story, ACOTAR isn't wholly original. Though Maas subverts those tropes Meyer popularized. In comparing the two, I hope to explore both how the series are the same, showcasing those elements which still appeal to readers, while revealing how they differ, addressing the changes which many readers would feel have been made for the better. It's worth pointing out that some readers now find ACOTAR controversial, often for the same reasons as Twilight. While I feel that Maas has improved on the formula, subverting certain tropes, there are aspects of YA or NA that are always going to rub people the wrong way, even as they continue to pull them in. I'm not going to list the problems with ACOTAR in this video, but the fact that it started to receive the same complaints shows how similar they are. Before we dive into the 5 elements the two series share though, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about books, share my bookish opinions, and offer the occasional writing advice. If that sounds like your cup of tea, hit that subscribe button. When looking at ACOTAR, we can examine how it draws on the popular saga that came before, while also reinventing it. Spoilers will be given for both series, so you have been warned. To begin, we have what I'll call the disrespectful partner. A grumpy, problematic love interest is by no means unique to either series. Going all the way back to classics like Jane Eyre, you have plenty of romantic pairings that would be unhealthy in real life. Women have always enjoyed bad boys, and several popular series, from Shatter Me to Caraval, feature them in abundance, though they're not without their detractors. That said, Twilight could be thanked, or blamed, for bringing the Byronic hero back into prominence. Reminiscent of characters like Heathcliff and Rochester, it's no secret that, by real-life standards, Edward has issues. I'm not here to disparage the series, or to give an essay on why Edward is abusive. But suffice it to say that, while I love him as a character, I wouldn't want to date him in actuality. Common charges against Edward include his being manipulative and controlling. He withholds information from Bella. He excludes her from important decisions. And he feels he knows what's best for her, making choices that nearly kill them both. Though Edward grows, he's never held accountable for his less than stellar behavior. Even Jacob questions Edward's actions, but Bella never confronts him. there are no consequences for his mistakes, or even an acknowledgement that he's made mistakes. If Edward does come close to being culpable, Bella lets him off the hook. In looking at ACOTAR, Edward's closest parallel is Tamlin. Easily BookTok's biggest love-to-hate character, Tamlin's behavior isn't that different from Edward's. In both series, our female protagonists, Bella and Feyre, come into their relationships with a power imbalance. Bella and Feyre are human, while their partners are supernatural beings who can overpower them, something both Edward and Tamlin take advantage of. ACOTAR opens with Tamlin kidnapping Feyre. Whisked away from her home and family, Feyre is taken with the expectation that she'll never see her family again. Edward likewise exerts control over Bella. In order to prevent Bella from visiting Jacob, he has Alice hold her hostage at his home while he's away hunting. In choosing to remain with Edward, Bella also faces the prospect of a permanent separation from her family. In New Moon, Edward leaves Bella for a time, allowing Bella to consider another option, Jacob Black. While Bella ultimately ends up with Edward, taking him back when he returns, ACOTAR flips the scenario. Though Feyre literally saves the day through her love for Tamlin, she leaves him. Unlike Bella, Feyre doesn't accept Tamlin's actions. Recognizing that he is toxic and that he has hurt her, she chooses Rhysand instead. ACOTAR is essentially what would have happened if Bella had held Edward accountable for hurting her and chosen Jacob. In Twilight, it was the expectation that Bella would end up with Edward. He was the first love interest, her soulmate, and someone readers had become invested in. Characters like Jacob mostly functioned to create conflict. But in ACOTAR, the first love interest, despite his seeming importance in the first novel, is discarded in lieu of the second choice, making the series more unpredictable, while punishing poor behavior which in Twilight was dismissed. Imprinting isn't unique to either series, but Twilight can be credited with starting the trend in the first place, while ACOTAR has cemented it. Many readers are sick of imprinting, but complaints aside, it's a prevalent trope in the YA and NA categories. In Twilight, imprinting was especially controversial because of the seeming lack of choice on the part of the girl being imprinted on. When Bella asks Jacob what would happen if the girl didn't return his interest, Jacob replies that no girl could resist that level of commitment, which isn't really a satisfying answer. The question of imprinting became more loaded when characters were seen imprinting on children, placing them in a position that modern readers see as tantamount to child grooming. With Jacob imprinting on Bella's daughter, the series took a weird turn. In ACOTAR, imprinting, as with Twilight's wolves, plays a role among the Fae. Feyre and Rhysand imprint on each other, to the point where Rhysand dreams of Feyre's paintings before he even meets her. But Rhysand, hesitant to make Feyre uncomfortable, doesn't reveal this to her right away. Within Maas's works, it's pointed out that imprinting can end badly. Unlike in Twilight, partnerships formed through imprinting in ACOTAR can lead to people who are incompatible ending up together. Moreover, those being imprinted on are shown as having more agency. While it's painful for someone to be rejected after they've imprinted on someone, they're not incapable of leaving the person alone. In Twilight, Sam can't tear himself away from Emily, and even in uncomfortable circumstances, those who imprint always end up together. In ACOTAR, however, we see people being turned away after they've imprinted. While Feyre and Rhysand fall in love, independently of their being imprinted, Feyre's sister, Elaine, grows uncomfortable when Lucian imprints on her. While the jury is still out on whether or not Elaine will choose Lucian, given more books in the series are planned. It's an interesting subversion of what we see in Twilight, because of the agency Elaine has. Lucian is miserable, but able to tear himself away as long as that's what Elaine prefers. Moreover, falling in love naturally is still promoted as the ideal. Recent imprinting on Feyre is treated as the cherry on top, rather than as the driving force behind their feelings. An obvious similarity between Twilight and ACOTAR is the position both protagonists begin in. Bella and Feyre are human, while their love interests are supernatural. Unlike Bella, Feyre is still formidable even while human. A skilled huntress and survivor, Feyre can fight, endure, and outsmart her adversaries, though there are occasions where it's too much for her. Where Bella is helpless, Feyre can at least hold her own. Still, being human puts both characters at a disadvantage, including that of being physically weaker than their partners. In time, this is rectified, as both Bella and Feyre are transformed into a vampire and a fae respectively, putting them on an equal footing with their romantic interest and the people around them. In this case, Maas doesn't change much on the surface. However, there are two crucial differences. First, Feyre is capable before her transformation. While being human has its disadvantages, she manages despite the odds, and she seldom needs anyone to save her. In fact, she's the one who saves Tamlin. Second, Feyre's transformation occurs much sooner in the series. At the end of the first book, Feyre is an immortal. By contrast, Twilight, despite almost having Bella become a vampire by the end of book 1, waits until halfway through the last book to give Bella her agency. Feyre gets a whole series to explore her special talents and train. Bella, meanwhile, spends most of her arc in a position of comparative helplessness, relying on the Collins and the Wolves to pull her out of scrapes. Like Feyre, Bella does become a badass in the end. Both women end up being the most powerful entities of their kind, wielding powers no one else has, but Bella takes much longer to reach this point. Modern readers struggle with how long it takes Bella to come into her own, but ACOTAR rectifies this complaint by giving Feyre power earlier. Another aspect Twilight has is its slower pace. Exploding in popularity the way it did, Twilight showed a story could be less action-oriented, more character-driven than plot-driven. The saga proved that a series without extensive battle sequences could still be entertaining. The fight against James was secondary when compared with the unfolding relationship between Edward and Bella. ACOTAR has more of a plot than Twilight does, but less than other fantasy series. As the novels progress, the plot increasingly takes a back seat. By the time readers reach A Court of Silver Flames, the plot is no more than a background to the characters, their struggles with grief and addiction, their friendships, their family dramas, and of course, the romance. As a traditional fantasy novel, Twilight can't compare with the likes of Lord of the Rings. But as a romantasy, it excels. Focusing on the characters first, Twilight paved the way for authors like Maas. Moreover, ACOTAR improved on Twilight's formula. Feyre was given distinct hobbies and interests. Every character takes time to share their backstories, and each person grows and changes throughout. There's disagreement on whether or not ACOTAR's characters are well written. Some find the characters deep, while others consider them shallow. However, whatever your feelings, it's safe to say that Maas digs deeper into her characters than Meyer does. Feyre and Nesta deal with mental illness. Bella shows hints of this, exhibiting signs of depression, anxiety, and even schizophrenia. But this side of her character is never explored. Bella was parentified as a child. Her parents went through divorce, and she's insecure. But these elements are glossed over. By contrast, the issues faced by Feyre and her sister Nesta are placed under a magnifying glass. The plot isn't afraid to pause to give Feyre time to work on her mental health. And that's something I appreciate. In previous videos, I've talked about how Meyer could have explored Bella's mental health. Even as a fan, I was disappointed that this side of Bella wasn't addressed, since there were hints. But Nas's depiction of Feyre and Nesta scratched that itch for me. Last but not least, we come to the fifth similarity the two series share, the emphasis on romance. Though Twilight was chaste, where ACOTAR was spicy, it didn't lack romance. While Bella and Edward don't do the deed until the last book, there's plenty of steam. Guarded kisses, electrified touches, and longing looks make up much of the story. Before intercourse is even on the table, Bella and Edward discuss marriage. They date officially, and Edward soon has no problem being close to Bella or holding her hand. While many readers attributed this celibacy with adding tension to the romance, there were those who were impatient with it, and that's where ACOTAR comes in. Reveling in sexual detail and treating writers to descriptions of velvet-lined steel, it doesn't hold back. A Court of Silver Flames, even less plot-driven than the first three books, is especially racy. Nothing is left to the imagination. ACOTAR took what irritated some Twilight fans and did the opposite. Both books are romance first and fantasy second, but where Twilight is as clean as freshly driven snow, ACOTAR is as edgy as any bodice ripper. In fact, while Twilight made chastity sexy, ACOTAR turned around and managed to make erotica mainstream. It can't be credited as the first book to reinvent Twilight, as 50 Shades of Grey likewise treated readers to a raunchier imagining of such a story. But ACOTAR feels like more of a spiritual successor since it retained the fantasy elements. When you realize how much ACOTAR has in common with Twilight, it's not hard to see why people love it or hate it. Featuring many of the same tropes and ideas readers of Twilight adored, ACOTAR pulled in a new swath of readers. However, ACOTAR took what made Twilight awesome and arguably improved on it. ACOTAR isn't perfect, and it has its own detractors, but when it comes to both what Twilight did right and what Twilight did wrong, ACOTAR builds on a familiar framework. Where Edward is forgiven for his poor behavior, Tamlin is dumped. The heroine gains agency, but at the start of the series rather than the beginning. Characters are given more depth, the mental health elements are actually acknowledged and explored, and the romance goes all out, celebrating raw sexuality and normalizing physical intimacy. If you were someone who loved Twilight, but wished it had tackled some of its tropes differently, you'll probably love ACOTAR. When it comes to the flaws I found with Twilight, despite being a hardcore fan, ACOTAR included everything I wished to see in Meyer Saga. As a result of its similarities, but also because of the changes Maas made to Twilight's formula, the series, for better or for worse, will, like Twilight, linger, pleasing ardent fans and annoying detractors in equal measure. Like Twilight, ACOTAR also took inspiration from older sources. ACOTAR is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but Twilight consciously emulated a number of classics. Many elements popular within Twilight can be credited to older works, and by borrowing from what came before, Twilight became a household name. In the video on the left, I list the classic literature that shaped Twilight into what it is now, while in the video on the right, I argued that Twilight is another genre altogether. Thanks for watching, and happy reading!